Welcome to our community conversation. We will begin promptly at 6 p.m. We are waiting for some other people to join us, but welcome, you are in the right place. If you are looking for our community conversation on men's mental health, this is the third of a three-part series. You are in the right place. We will begin momentarily. Welcome to our community conversation. We'll begin promptly at 6 p.m. We're just waiting for a few other people to join us. You are in the right place if you're looking for a community conversation on men's mental health issues. Welcome. We'll begin momentarily. Welcome to our community conversations. You are in the right place. We'll begin promptly at 6 p.m. We're just waiting for a few other people to join us. But welcome. I also do research on spirituality and health, on the impact of anxiety on mental health and the well-being of minority populations. I will be moderating this conversation today. I want to introduce you, first of all, to our guests. We have three wonderful guests, and they're here to share their insights. Let me introduce you to Mr. Philip White first. He's a family prevention social worker with 18 years of his time as the program manager of the Henrico County Fatherhood Accountability Support Program. Over 1,200 men have completed the support group since 2003. He earned his bachelor's degree in sociology from Elizabeth City State University and a master fatherhood training certification from the National Partnership Community Leadership in 2012. He's the CEO of Six Men Connection, a consulting firm that focuses on creating family stability by training and effectively engaging men. He's the president-elect of Silent Tears for Men in Richmond, Virginia. Welcome, Mr. White.
Thank you, Dr. Fife. I'm very, very thrilled to be with the panel. This is exciting for me. I'm looking forward to it. I think many of the questions that may come up today kind of fall in my wheelbarrow, and I'm just excited to have the opportunity to be part of this panel. Thank you so much.
We're excited to have you.
Yes, sir.
Next, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Marissa Edwards. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Eating Disorders at Sheppard Pratt. Prior to graduating graduate school, she received her bachelor's degree from Hampton University, where she majored in psychology with a concentration in relationship and family therapy. Dr. Edwards provides individual and group therapy to patients of all ages. She earned her PhD in clinical health psychology from Virginia State University. Throughout her educational and training experiences, Dr. Edwards has worked with individuals, couples, and families with various mental illnesses, health, behavior, and emotional difficulties. Her clinical training is rooted in evidence-based practices, and she has extensive training in cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance, and commitment therapy. Welcome, Dr. Edwards.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And last but certainly not least, Mr. Enrique Pascal. Mr. Pascal was born in Panama, and he departed his native land at the age of 5 with his mother and sister. In 1993, Enrique began a successful promotion company named All or Nothing Productions. His company became one of the most sought-after corporations in the entertainment industry. He arranged parties and concerts for many in the world of hip-hop and also promoted R&B acts along with comedy. Enrique worked closely with Jay-Z and Damon Dash as they formulated Rockefeller Records. Mr. Pascal's determination helped him to experience success at a very high level. He was featured in several music videos on BET, MTV, and the movie Backstage. Mr. Pascal is now a pastor and is the founder of Fit for the Kingdom Global Ministries. Fit for the Kingdom is a ministry which focuses on the total person, the spirit, the soul, and the body. Welcome, Mr. Pascal.
There you go. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I am super excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Happy to have you. Well, we're going to have this just a conversation really again about men's health. Like I mentioned, this is the third of a 3-event series this month. Previously, we discussed fathering in a crisis during COVID-19 and much of the racial unrest. We talked about that 2 weeks ago on June 15th. And on June 1st, we focused on depression and anxiety and trauma in men and its impact on men during this time of quarantine. Today, we're going to have a conversation about relationships, how relationships have been impacted by COVID-19 and how we can mend relationships. The virus, as we all know, has had a profound impact on all social relationships. Relationships are already challenging in and of themselves. And when we throw in COVID-19 and we add racial unrest, it's just a tremendous interruption to all of us. And of course, it's an interruption to the economy as well as health and well-being. We just believe that one of the areas that is most affected, that most impacts us is in the area of relationships, whether they be romantic or not. So we want to talk a little bit about that. There's a tremendous strain on parents who are struggling to find ways of either holding their job or finding a new job. Also, there's an unprecedented demand on parents in terms of educating their kids from home. And even now that we're in the summer months, a lot of learning facilities have not reopened. A lot of things that kids would normally be able to do are not available. So therefore, parents have to be responsible for a lot more. So maintaining and growing healthy relationships during this time is very critical. So let me start by asking this question. And Mr. White, I'd like you to address this question first. How have relationships been affected by COVID-19, just from your experiences and what you've seen?
It's kind of a mixed bag, Dr. Fadi. It's in reference to parents. I deal with a lot of parents who don't necessarily live in the same household. We call it the two household reality for kids, and it's the issue of custody and visitation, and that can always be a rather difficult journey to navigate sometimes. So with the virus, the whole issue of my court order custody visits can be disrupted because one parent or the other can take the issue of safety for the children, or the parent that has visitation may not want to have visits because he or she is concerned that that could result in some harm to the child. So trying to get both parents to come to a mutual agreement in reference to this virus, and in the same position that we all are in, that we don't know how long we're going to be in this new norm. So in regard to how parents exercise their visits, that takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of negotiation, and it takes a great amount of creativity. And that's where we try to help men to understand, particularly those that is they're into this fight, and some trying to get them to back down from that and recognize that there's some safety concerns in regard to the mother may say, well, I don't want my kids to go anywhere. They're not seeing my folks. I don't want them to see your folks. They just need to stay home. And helping men to lower their temperature in reference to that and try to be creative, like do Zoom, do whatever remote location, do FaceTime, do something that can kind of just ease that stress and that drama that a lot of parents can experience.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That's a tremendous issue. And you mentioned creativity, and that is definitely a challenge in this time, especially when it comes to custody issues. And we'll definitely dive into that question a little bit more later on. Dr. Edwards, what have you seen in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on relationships?
With regard to the new normal, as we like to call it, there's absolutely nothing normal about it. There's nothing normal about us being home 24/7. There's nothing normal about us not being able to express ourselves and engage in things that we are used to engaging in. Relationships weren't made for us to be together 24/7. And so the fact that we are now forced to spend so much time together, you've seen a lot of people who are experiencing mental health issues as a result. You're experiencing relationship issues as a result. People's stress levels are higher than normal. The expectations that we have for each other in relationships are also changing. A lot of the times we have very unrealistic expectations of what this might look like. Things aren't going to look like they did 6 months ago with regard to our relationships and our homes and our responsibilities. And so I think a lot of those things need to be revisited as a result of COVID, while taking into consideration the fact that things are different, things are changing. We've seen a lot of people, couples who are living together, couples who might be separated as a result of the virus, couples who have children who are also home 24/7 and what that might look like, or even couples who are going through the virus themselves and how that can be challenging, or how stress can impact your intimate relationships. Things along those lines are very, very challenged right now. And so it is hard. And I think a lot of people are realizing as the time is going on, and like we said, there's no end date. We don't know when this is going to end. We don't know when things are going to go back to normal. And so, adjusting to what that might look like. There's no one in society that hasn't been affected by COVID. So everyone is experiencing this on some level. And, the relationship is the most fundamental part of the family. So if the family isn't adjusted, it might cause issues in every other realm.
Yes, thank you. And I think the thing that you highlighted is adjustments. And even Mr. White talked about creativity, and he gets back to the idea of we have to make changes now, and we have to, you mentioned revisiting roles, and you alluded to that. In order to have successful relationships and to really move forward in this time, there has to be some revisiting of roles.
Absolutely.
Mr. Pascal, as a pastor, as a community leader, as someone who's really been connected to the media world, what have you seen so far, and how have relationships been affected by COVID-19?
Well, it has been quite an adjustment for quite a few people. Even for myself at home, my wife is normally at work at the salon, and when COVID hit, she ended up being home more. So we had to really readjust, and I had to really understand that now that she's home, she's the queen of the castle. And her being the queen of the castle, I had to readjust and allow her to be queen, because for quite some time I've been home by myself. But now that she's here, now I'm sharing more space with her. And that was quite a challenge, because I had to readjust and really understand that now she's here, and there's some things that she's doing now that normally would not happen because I'm home by myself and stuff like that. So talking to people out there, it's been really stressful. Um, there needs to be a readjustment. And like you stated, we have to understand what roles are and respect those roles, and understand that there's both importance on both sides of the fence. I've heard that domestic violence is up a whole lot more now. And it's because people don't know how to cope. And what I've seen through counseling couples and counseling people is that people are home now fighting for territory. So now when you have people fighting for territory, there's a constant clash. So I'm staying pretty busy counseling people, letting them know that we can share the same territory, but we don't have to fight each other to gain ground. We fight for each other. So that's the reason why I'm seeing that domestic violence is up, because people don't really know how to really operate in the same space, because they have not had to for such a long time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things I've noticed is that, this quarantine and this virus has really revealed the position of many relationships. So it's almost like it's not something new in the relationship. Some of the issues that have not been dealt with, when you're in close proximity, those things tend to come to the surface. So I guess the positive side is it's really an opportunity for people to re-examine their relationship, reevaluate their relationship, and really work on things together if they can do so. You mentioned something else, Mr. Pascal, and that's also domestic violence. And we know, according to the CDC, approximately 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have experienced some degree of intimate partner violence. And I know, Dr. Edwards, you mentioned this in a previous meeting in terms of seeing the increase in that and having a real concern in that area. Can you share more about that?
Sure. So as the virus became the pandemic that it was, I read and saw a lot about the increase in domestic violence, which originally wasn't something that I was even thinking about. I was thinking more along the lines of like mental health issues. But if we're truly thinking about it, considering the fact that a lot of times domestic violence happens as a result of lack of control or wanting to control something, and how that might look now that the world is almost shut down and we are very much out of control. And so when we are out of control, we tend to deflect that onto others. We might deflect that onto those who are seemingly weaker than us, or those we feel that we can control. And a lot of times that turns into domestic or partner violence. Also, with stay-at-home orders being in place, a lot of times people can't get out on one end to cope with whatever stress they might be having to lead to domestic violence. And for others, for people who are in domestic violence situations, they aren't able to leave. They might not feel comfortable. They might not have anywhere else to go for risk of, contracting the virus, for risk of spreading the virus, or for the risk of things not being open. So there is a lack of safety. I have seen that a lot of counties and a lot of cities have seen like rapid increases in domestic violence rates, and that they've had to essentially work really quickly on how to get services to people in a virtual manner and how that might be a little bit more difficult. So just imagine being locked in a home with an abuser and not being able to reach out for help or not being able to have someone come over and kind of break the tension. It might be a lot more difficult for those individuals. And so, you know, reaching out to hotlines like the National Domestic Violence websites and phone lines are very important at times like this. Reaching out to support systems is easier sometimes. Sometimes easier said than done. A lot of times those who are in these situations can't come out or can't get out for various different reasons, be it financial or for fear of losing children or losing their lives. And so a lot of times it is very important to remember that it's not just as simple as walking out of the front door. And so and considering how COVID has kind of progressed, it might be difficult for some of these individuals.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. I really want to just take time to, again, talk about the importance of discussing the issue of domestic violence during this time, because I feel like in some ways, I think local governments and the federal government as well, we can be very nearsighted if we're advising people to stay at home in a pandemic when they are being violated and taken advantage of in their homes. And we have to do more. And I'm glad you mentioned, Dr. Edwards, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And I want to share that number with everyone that's listening. The number is 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-7233. One of the things I've been hearing a lot from couples is that one partner may be more serious in terms of the approach to the pandemic than the other. So let me start with you, Mr. White. How can couples approach this crisis in unity when one individual may take more risk than the other individual, or one individual may be more serious about the pandemic than the other individual?
Yeah, that's a very, very challenging situation. And you know, it requires a certain amount of, the parent that has probably the greatest amount of education about the virus need to be, again, creative with how do you pass on information to the other parent that doesn't result in this fight, so to speak. If one parent says, I don't believe in it, I'm into the conspiracy theory, I don't want to wear a mask, it's difficult, but sometimes it's a matter of trying to educate the parents, trying not to be bossy, but to give them information that's current, try to create opportunities to sit down with them together and watch the scientists give information out. And I think that's probably the most effective way, is to point them to the scientists. You know, some people that has that kind of, you know, they can easily turn into a disagreement just over a normal conversation, is not to, don't be the boss. Direct them towards people like the scientists to get their information. And hopefully that can reduce the tension that exists, that's going to happen. And people, yeah, that's one of the biggest issues with the virus is folks, some people believe it's serious, others don't. But when you got children in the middle of it, hopefully both parents can find a way to compromise and come to some agreements about the safety of the children. That would be my advice.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Pascal, your thoughts on that? How can couples come together in unity when there are two different opinions on the virus?
Yeah, well, I would say there's something seriously wrong if you are not willing to take the steps needed to protect your family and yourself, and you would not bring comfort to your mate, then there's something more going on that we have to address beyond this virus. Because I mean, if for you to have an opinion and go against what the numbers are and what the truth is, there's something else going on here, and no relationship should be dominated by a person. So if you don't respect what's going on, and you don't want to respect my health and the health of the children, and even your own health, there's something more going on that's beyond the virus, you know? So I think that that's something that should be looked into, and definitely communication. I mean, communicate. Why do you feel this way? And give me an explanation. How do we solve this? And if it's one-sided, then there's something else that should be addressed that's beyond the virus, because we are then at that point in a relationship that's unhealthy. And that person is an abuser. That person is dominating the relationship, not concerned about how the other person feels. So if that was to be the case, then that relationship should be examined, because it goes way beyond just the virus at that point.
Thank you for those thoughts. Dr. Edwards, your thoughts?
So I believe that everyone is essentially entitled to their own opinion. However, the safety of family needs to come first, and the safety of each individual should also be considered. One of the, Mr. Pascal, you mentioned communication and how important that would be. A lot of times I think in couples, we don't realize that they might not understand things the way that we're trying to say them, or that we might, that communication can sometimes get lost. So maybe if I'm in a couple and I'm saying, I don't want to go out, I don't feel safe, someone might not understand what that means, or understand the significance of why you don't feel safe, or why this is something that's challenging for you. So I think a lot of communication is really important here. Some empathy is also important, because you might not be able to completely understand why that person feels that way, but it is important to empathize with them and come to an agreement, find a middle ground that is best for yourself, best for the couple, and best for the family. And so like you said, communication is definitely key. And if there is, constant battles or constant challenges with result to this, it is important to examine that relationship a little bit further. Why is this something that's so important? Why is this something that is causing this level of discommunication between the two of us? And so I think it is important to examine and consider those things when you're having any issues along those lines.
Yeah, I think those were some great thoughts, and I heard several things. I heard the importance of communicating, really sitting down, probably just discussing the individual's fear, just talking about where it may stem from. And again, if the person who is concerned is in line with what science is saying, that could be a challenging situation. But again, continuous conversation, and also showing empathy, being able to feel what the other person is feeling, even though you're not in that situation. I think that's a very important building block of healthy relationships. And I think Mr. Pascal, you also mentioned, I mean, if that can't be achieved, then there might be something else happening there. And Dr. Edwards, you mentioned that as well. And trying to come to some type of agreement. I also think about just being open to reevaluate, your prevention plan. In my relationship, I'm the much more careful person. I'm super careful. And for my wife, she enjoys nature. And it's really important for her to get outside, to be able to breed, and because she's a creative, to breed and to be creative. So we've had to talk about it and find healthy ways of being able to get her in the position outside where she can be creative and be herself. Now, for some people, they don't care. They will stay in the house for a year. But for many people, that can be an issue. I think that's a wonderful conversation and great advice. What do you see as some of the barriers of effective co-parenting, especially for parents who don't live together? So for parents who are in a situation where they're co-parenting, where there's divorce or separation, what do you see as some of the barriers to co-parenting? Mr. Pascal.
Dr. Fife, there has to be a universal voice. When you are co-parenting, if there's two voices, that causes so much damage for the children. Even though both parents are not together, there should be a universal voice where the children understand that when mom and dad speak, they both are saying the same thing, because you are our number one priority. If there's not a universal voice, then that will always cause disorder and chaos in the households. And children are the most vulnerable when you have both parents speaking differently. So I think that one of the best things that we can do when we are in two separate households is let the children know that when it comes to dad and mom, we are always, when it comes to you, a united front. If we don't have that, then I believe that's one of the most destructive things that we have when we have two different households.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Edwards, your thoughts? What are some of the barriers of effective co-parenting?
So I believe that a lot of what happens in co-parenting relationships are differences of opinions that go to the extreme, essentially. So if we're not thinking about the children, not putting them first, if we're considering our own preferences or our own, selfish needs, instead of thinking of the kids, it becomes problematic. And so I think it's important for parents to remember that. And in theory, we would like to have all of our relationships that are empathetic and open we have open communication and we see eye to eye on everything, but that's not always the reality. And so it is important to have some level of understanding, some level of communication, and some level of trying to reach a middle ground for the sake of the kids. And like I said, that always doesn't happen. So the next step would be to try to find a middle ground. If you can't find the middle ground, find some type of mediation. If the two of you can't reach a middle ground, mediation services are still available virtually. And if that doesn't work, of course, if we need to revisit custody agreements or if we need to revisit legal documents, of course, we don't want that to be the first plan of attack, but I think it is something that can be binding and something that is really helpful in those kinds of situations. But I think a lot of the times the barriers come into play when there is just that lack of communication, lack of understanding, and lack of empathy with regard to the other parent. And it can get very dicey. It can get very uncomfortable very quickly because if we're in two different places, imagine being across country with, trying to co-parent during a virus where one state might be more locked down than another, or, how the kids might be feeling. They're already out of school. They can't see their friends. They can't see their teachers. And now they also can't see parents. And so that might be an additional stressor. So those barriers, in addition to the fact that we all have our own level of stress at this point as well. And so managing those confounding variables can be really, really hard sometimes.
Yes, and I heard a very creative story in terms of what you mentioned, where they were co-parents and they were in different states and the states had different levels of quarantine. And what they were doing is the mother was taking the child to the border. So yeah, just to kind of work around things. Thank you so much for sharing that. Mr. White, you're in a really unique situation because you've dealt with a lot of these custody situations in terms of advising men and seeing some of these struggles. So what do you see as some of the barriers to effective co-parenting, specifically for men in these relationships?
Yeah, it starts with the relationship. And if the relationship was filled with a lot of tension, unforgiveness, the parents, even though they may say this, they may say they focus on their children, but it is that relationship. Whenever there's a breakup in a relationship, that's a loss. That's a sense of a failure, and which parent, kind of take responsibility of the role as the reason why the relationship broke up or what was the conflict, and for them not to be able to heal from that. That's what keeps these relationships in the courts. Trying to get people to mediate, to come to some sense of closure about that particular relationship. And that's hard for a lot of parents, particularly if there's still some feelings going on and one parent is trying to suppress those feelings because they think the other one is not going to be receptive to it, then the children get caught in the middle of that stuff. And we do a lot with men to try to free them from that situation. And if they were the cause of the breakup, they started cheating or doing something foolish, is to try to mend that relationship, because we haven't been as males since we were little boys and get into our teenhood, then our manhood and our parenthood. And what we try to do is help men to embrace their personhood, to embrace all of their emotional steps, safe. And if they can understand that a relationship is filled with emotions, all kinds of emotions. But if you're not in touch with those emotions, then you just react. You're just constantly in a state of conflict. And that's for men, that's it's a health issue. Then it can turn into a mental health issue. So trying to get them to be in touch with their bodies and understand the signals that their body is sending them when they're starting to get anxiety or just frustrated and angry and mad. And you know, but it's a training and being able to recognize that, Dad, if you cause this relationship not to function, like men would say to us, I messed up. Okay, you messed up. So now how can you fix that? Maybe, Dad, you just need to start by saying to Mom, I'm sorry. Just say to her, I'm sorry. Even if she doesn't receive it well, she heard you. And practice that. Practice kindness, practice patience, practice a sense of understanding her value. Because men say this stuff, Dr. Fife, all the time. Well, I'm done with her. No, you're not done with her. She's the mother of your children. And 3 of the children got your nose, got your ears. She see you every day, Dad. And in the fact that you recognizing that you would never, ever be done with her, because you guys are together for the rest of your lives. You got children. And just trying to help men to not be so defensive and recognize that if you messed up, if you were the one that caused this, then own it and seek her forgiveness for what happened, and focus on, get away from the relationship and focus on the wellness of your children. And that's a technique that has to be practiced. You just can't, if you don't have it, you don't have it. How to manage these kind of feelings and make that relationship functional for the best outcome for your children.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. White. I'm glad you're doing that work because it's so critical, like you mentioned, to really be in touch with your emotions, to be able to acknowledge your emotions, all of them, not just anger or disgust or rage, but sadness, discouragement, to be able to have a voice and a label for each of those, to be able to really experience your whole self. And so often men are not able to do that. And oftentimes that is at the center of broken relationships. And then you also mentioned, you know, making amends, taking responsibility for the things that we've done that are not right. And that can really improve relationships and could probably improve some of the financial hardships and the instability that the child would face as well if the relationship is more mended. I want to go to Mr. Pascal because I remember reading specifically in your bio, and we had this quick talk, that you are very, very interested in mending relationships and in helping men to do that. How do you feel about some of the things that we're talking about now, and how do you go about doing that, helping to mend men?
You know, it's Dr. Fife, it's all about education. I speak about this when little girls are 2, 3, 4-year-olds. We put dolls in their hands, and these little girls are playing house at a very young age, and they're playing mommy and daddy without the daddy there. So at a very young age, this young girl, little girl, she's learning about being a mother. She's learning about household. She's learning about raising a child independent from the man. Now, the little boy at the same age is playing wrestling. He's playing cops and robbers. He's not being brought up and taught how to be nurturing, caring, and responsible. So that right there, even at an early age, there's a breach. There is a miseducation, if you will, because boys don't understand at an early age what a man should be, and fatherhood, and being around a little girl, and learning about house and all of those things, right? So by the time the little girl is 18, she had 18 or 15 years of practice. She's playing mommy, changing the diaper, she's feeding the baby, while the little boy is playing cops and robbers. He never learned what it was to change a diaper. He never learned what it was to shush a baby to sleep. He never learned none of that stuff, right? So it's all about education. We need to teach our young boys at an early age what family looks like. What is the structure of the family? Because women are way advanced when it comes to that than we are. And that's the reason why they say that women mature more than men. Well, they do, because at an early age, they're being taught what it is to be a responsible person who would take care of a household and a child without the presence of a man. That is dangerous, and that has bankrupt many, many relationships and many households.
Dr. Edwards, I have to hear what you have to say about this. You know, just if you can comment just about what you've heard, and also on the process of socialization, as Mr. Pascal mentioned, and its role in how kids are raised and what we see today.
Absolutely. So the role of socialization, like you mentioned, starts very, very early. That's when we're developing gender roles. That's when we're developing what's normative, what's accepted, what's not accepted, and that those things follow us for a really, really long time. And in our community, certain things are taboo, certain things are accepted, and certain things just aren't accepted or discussed. And so a lot of times girls are expected to act a certain way, while men or boys are expected to act a very different way. And we're treated differently, we're educated differently, we're taught differently. And then when we're getting to our relationship forming years, our expectations for the other person look very different. And imagine if we don't have role models, positive role models. Maybe our parents aren't married, or they're separated, or we've never been viewed, or we've never been able to have that type of relationship shown to us. It can make things very difficult. And so on top of that, men, especially in our community, it's not acceptable for them to cry or to be upset or to express emotion. And so in order for us to start mending those relationships, it's important for us as a community to just allow things to happen, allow children to grow the way they're going to grow, allow relationships to form the way they're going to form, and for us to realize that emotions aren't bad, emotions don't mean something, they don't equal a certain thing, they don't signify something. It's important for us to be emotionally intelligent, because women are socialized to be somewhat emotionally intelligent and men are not. And so when we get to the point when we're 18 and 19 and 20, a female might be able to express her feelings and share how she's feeling, but a man might resort to anger or resort to rage or resort to retreating as a result of the same emotion a female is able to express. And so starting by mending those types of emotions and those types of responses will, I believe, in fact, mend some of those relationships, because when we're, emotionally intelligent on both ends, we're able to communicate better. We're able to have healthier relationships and, better families. And I think it's important to start there with regard to mending relationships.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And an interesting statistic that women speak about 25,000 words a day, men 12,000. That's the difference in terms of just expressing. And sometimes expression is just about saying the obvious or speaking the obvious. And then that could really impact how we live with our emotions. So we're a little behind in that area. If you're just joining us, we're having a discussion today with 3 experts, and we are sponsored by the Friends of Prevention Coalition and RVHA. For more information, please visit our website at fopcrva.com or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/FOPCRVA. I want to get into a little bit more specific information on co-parenting and suggestions that you may have on how to navigate very fragile relationships between parents when it comes to being creative with schedules and responsibilities. What are some of the things that you can share with our listeners that are much more specific in terms of dealing or navigating fragile relationships when it comes to creating schedules and responsibilities? Mr. Pascal?
Well, Dr. Fife, I think one of the most important things is that when you have a problem with someone that you may have been in relationship with, that you, if nothing else, you come to an agreement that it's all about the children. So if nothing else, if you guys cannot mend it, if you guys can't work out, then have enough love for the children to do that for them. And I think that if you make the children the main focus, you make them the top priority and take your feelings out of the equation, why it did not work, who did what, You did this, you did that, you hurt me. Sometimes we would never get what we really need from that person, that real apology, that real acceptance of wrong, right? So if that's the case, then let's take ourselves out of the equation if we can. Let's be mature about this, right? And let's make our son, our daughters, our children the main focus, because we don't want to keep this cycle going. And we understand that they are in the middle. So if mom and dad are not getting along, now the children are in the middle of the battle. And when I counsel folks, one of the things that I always push is it's not about you. It is about the children. And I put the pressure on the parents because the children did not ask to be born into all of this chaos and disorder. And my question is, do you want this cycle to continue? How much do you love your children? So I take it out of them, make it bigger than them, and make it about the children, and make it about their grandchildren and their grandchildren's children, because this is generational. If we can't fix it here, then it's a good chance that it can't continue. So I believe that one of the things that's important is for us to come together and make it about the children and not about ourselves, not being selfish, and see the bigger picture here.
Thank you for those thoughts. Mr. White, your thoughts?
Yes, sir. It's you know, it's a certain skill, particularly dealing with men. There's this saying that goes like this: mothers raise their daughters, but they love their sons. And in those two vast different worlds, and as far as equipping boys to be efficient in all areas of their life, you know, how to take care of a home, how to cook, how to iron your clothes, how to do all the necessities that you need to have to survive and manage on your own. My mother used to say to myself and my brothers and all of us, all the boys, she used to say this to us all the time when we were children and teenagers, that the man that get along best with a woman is a man that can get along just as well without a woman. So you acquired all of those attributes of taking care of a home. So when your children came, as with me, I was very comfortable I have a son and a daughter, with taking care of them from the moment they were born. Taking them to the doctors and doing everything that normally we expect the mothers to do, and to be there with her for everything related to the children, from their education to recreation, whatever, to be present. And it is a challenge with we as a culture we are having children. We have not stopped having children. But marriage as an institution has declined significantly over time. So our children are, you know, they're growing up in these two households. And Dr. Fife, there's one activity that we use a lot with dads, and it can be real touchy, but it's something that dads have to be prepared for. We call it the two daddy reality. And if mom and dad aren't living in the same household and they have children together, there's a high probability that both mom and dad will get into new relationships. And dads have this tendency to say, I don't know, I don't care about what she's doing. I don't care who she's in. I'm just glad she's not with me. And then we say, well, hold up, dad, hold up. If mom is in another relationship, you need to know who that person is. They need to know you. And one of the difficult areas for dads to accept that if their children come to them and they say this to them, daddy, guess what? We got two daddies. How you gonna handle that? And most men can't handle that. And what we have to do is help dad understand a very critical reality of what the children just said. My background is a lot to do with prevention and child protective services. So I've seen a share of some difficult things that can happen to children with men who enter their lives through their mothers. So if kids come to daddy, and I hope the daddies on this Facebook Live hear me clearly. If your children come to you and say, daddy, guess what? We got two daddies. Daddy shouldn't take that as a slight against him. All the children are saying is, daddy, we have met someone that reminds us of you. He's fun. He plays with us. He brings his kids over. We all play together. He's a cool guy. And what daddy needs to do is to make it his efforts to meet that brother and acknowledge that brother in an affirmative way. Say, hey man, I appreciate the kind of man you are. My kids care about you. I appreciate that, man. Keep it up. Anything I can do, let me know. See, man, we don't give affirmation to each other the way women do. We don't compliment each other. We don't lift each other up. If I'm doing a good job, it would be so much more fulfilling for me for another man to say to me, hey, Phil, I see how you round. I see you when you're with your wife. I see how you're doing with your kids, man. That's great. That's great, man. Keep it up. Just for another guy to say that to a guy, that means a lot. You know, so we as I say to guys all the time, watch how women take care of each other. Watch how they constantly compliment each other from the head to the toe. If something's going wrong, they're gonna be there for them. You see, and that's where we get into that isolation, and isolation is killing us. Rather than getting us some noble men to be in our lives that I know I can reach out to, or they're just gonna come and check on me because they haven't heard from me. If we can get men to understand that and unite and take care of each other, then I think the whole world would be a better place. Rather than focus on this, raising boys in this hyper masculinity culture that we have, and that's what's destroying us. That's what's destroying us every day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Toxic masculinity is just that. It's toxic. And you bring up a point that's really critical, because you started talking about male-to-male relationships and friendships and the importance of affirming each other. And it's interesting, because I would say probably in the last 6 or 7 years of my life, I think I've learned more about that than any other time in my life. Just having really good friends who can kind of speak affirmations to me, and not having to depend. I don't have to depend on my wife for all the affirmations. And for such a long time, I think a lot of men, we are socialized to expect those things from women, from mother or from other women, and not be able to really embrace those positive thoughts from men. And they're so important. So thank you for sharing that. This is a very interesting statistic that I read. And Dr. Edwards, I want you to address this if you can. When mothers and fathers were asked this question, were asked whether one parent can bring up a child as well as two parents together, only 35% of fathers said that that's true. They agreed or strongly agreed. But over 2/3, 64% of Black mothers agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that one parent can bring up a child as well as two parents together. Dr. Edwards, how do you address that statistic and the disparity in that statistic?
Absolutely. So we have kind of touched on it a little bit already, discussing the way that women are socialized and how we are groomed to hope to become mothers and dream to become mothers. And in our community, the single parent household isn't far off. It's something that happens. It's something that we've seen. It's something that we're, quote, kind of used to seeing, and something that we've seen the results. We've seen the fruitfulness of single parent households. And so I think it's important for women, we tend to expect it, or we tend to become more, it's a more normalized idea that, there might be one person raising the child as opposed to two parents. It's actually probably something that we, think about at some point. If you were to find out you're pregnant, okay, so I'd be great to have someone with me, but am I going to be able to do this by myself if it happens? It's something that comes up naturally for us. And so, with the knowledge that the bond between a mother and child might look a little bit different from the bond between a father and a child, I can imagine that women are probably more, feel as though they're more equipped. I'm not going to say that they are, but I'm going to say that they feel that they're more equipped to manage raising a child by themselves. And like I said, it's become normalized. It's become socialized for us to be able to look at a child and raising that child by ourselves, whereas it might not be as normal for a man to think that, where of course we know that they're single fathers, we know that they're single mothers, but in this line of thought, we're thinking about it more so in a way that like women are accustomed to thinking.
Again, if you're just joining us, we're brought to you by Friends of Prevention Coalition. Please visit our website at fopcrva.com. Very controversial statistic. Mr. Pascal, how do you account for the disparity in that statistic where only 34% of men say that one parent can do a better job than two, but 64% of women say that one parent can do a better job instead of two?
That is so damaging. There's no way in the world one parent can do the job of two, because both parents play an important part in raising a child. A woman can never raise a child the way a man can, and vice versa, because each person has something very important to bring to the table. And it's very problematic when we are telling women to think like men. Well, you can't think like me. You know, there was a book that was written some years ago, became very popular, telling women think like a man. Well, you can't think like me because we're not wired the same way. When we walk into a room, we don't see the same things. I see one box. You see many boxes. We're not built the same way. So what happens is that when we take what I have and what you have and bring it together, now we're working for the betterment of that child, of that family. The family structure was not created by one person. It wasn't a man who made a child. It wasn't a woman who made a child. It was a man and a woman who made a child. So both of these DNAs, both of these persons are in this child. So when a child don't have the mother or father, there's a missing piece. It took two to make the one, right? So if we take one out of the equation, something is wrong with that math. So when we think that one person can do a better job of two people who work together, that is a total misconception. And that's the reason why a lot of children have the issues in school, the issues in the earth, the issues in the world. It's because the family structure has been damaged to the point where in many households, it's understood that a man is not needed. Mom can raise me. Well, mom can't raise you the way she can raise you if your dad was there to be of help, to be of assistance, or vice versa. So there has to be, again, a working together so that these kids will be healthy, because I have children who I raised or was raised without me. But now my youngest is raised with both mom and dad. And I can tell you the big difference between what I see with my other four children and the one that was raised with both parents. She is the most healthiest, the most happiest, the most intelligent, the most confident child you'll ever meet. And I can pinpoint it to the fact that she has two parents in the household respecting each other, playing their appropriate roles and raising her. And for that reason, we have a strong child. And the difference is we have two families, two parents in the household working together.
So, Mr. Pascal, I can hear a little bit of passion in your voice in that question. Thank you for that. And I definitely want to acknowledge what you said as well, Dr. Edwards, in bringing the woman's perspective and in saying that, you know, in our communities where we see a lot of single parenting, when women have had to take up that mantle so much, it's easy to see why there's that disparity in the statistic because of what Black women in particular have had to endure. Mr. White, your perspective on this, especially in the field that you have worked in and labored in with men. Why the disparity?
Yeah, it is. And Dr. Edwards and Rico was correct in regard to this major separation as far as parents and single parent households. Yes, we do have a significant problem with that statistical fact. That's what's created in a lot of men that we see, this thing we call the father wound. And even a grown man, you know, still has issues or still have questions about why my dad wasn't in my life. And all he may know about his dad is what he's being told by relatives. And it's sad, it's very sad when a dad, you know, we asked the dad, is your dad still alive? He said, yeah, he's alive. He lives about 4 blocks from me. but I don't want to have anything with him. Why not? You're a grown man now. Why can't you go and meet your dad and hear his story? Because sometimes children that grow up without their fathers, sometimes they don't know their father's history. They don't know that dad may not have grown up with his father. It may go generational. So nobody knows what it feels like to grow up with their dad. And somebody, as we say, the dads in group, you got to be the one to break that chain. And go get your dad. Go find your dad. Let him know he's got grandchildren. How are you going to feel when you get word that he passed away? Are you going to go to the service? Are you going to shed tears? How are you going to feel? So it's all of these emotions that's going to be coming if men don't try to reach out to their dads. And one of the things that we have found out, Dr. Fight, is that the dad wants to have a contact with their children. Sometimes dads are afraid to approach their children because they fear that they may be rejected. So they watch him from afar. You know, it's like we say to men, some men say, well, because I'm not around doesn't mean I'm not around. You know, I may still show up at my kid's ball game. I'm just gonna stay off in the shadows and watch them. I may still go to somewhere where they doing stuff. I'm just not gonna let anybody know I'm there. I've had men say that. Why don't you go and let people know? No, I don't want to disrupt anything. I don't want to get into no issue with his mom. I just want to see how he's doing. So I just kind of lay back in my car, you know, that fear, because what I didn't do keeps us away. So that's the work that we're doing, is to help these men address this father wound, understand that it is critical, regardless of whatever age they are, that they go and meet their sons and daughters. Anticipate it may be awkward in the beginning, but stand firm. And we work with them to understand that you may get some hostility initially, but if you continue to show up, that will, over time, will go away. Because we have so many young men, and young men in particular, that are growing up saying things like, well, my mom was my dad. You know, I don't need my dad. He wasn't around, so I don't need him. And that hurt is so real. And you know, sometimes I like to share with moms, you got to encourage him, your son. If you know where dad is to bring them together and let that heal and begin.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because one of the things that you mentioned that I want to highlight is this whole idea of our children knowing our stories and our narrative. That's so critical. But if we're not connected to our emotions, it's very difficult to tell our stories. And it's very difficult then for them to walk in freedom or in a clear space if we don't create that clear space by dealing with our issues and our struggles. Thank you so much, the three of you. Thank you so much, Mr. White, Mr. Pascal, Dr. Edwards. Again, I just want to share with all of you that are listening, we are brought to you by Friends of Prevention Coalition and the Richmond Behavioral Health Authorities. For more information, please visit our website at fopcrva.com. And please follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/FOPCRVA. We had a wonderful conversation today. Please look for more of these conversations. Next month is Women's Mental Health Month, and we'll be talking about some of these issues as they pertain to women. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much again to our guests. Blessings to you all. Thank you.